Hi guys. Alright, standard deviation is the topic for 8.4, and it's a way of again, it's kind of similar to what we talked about in 8.3, how the median, when you have skew data, the median is a better measure of central tendency, and the IQR is a value that kind of backs up the median to say, you know, how consistent is the data with the median. So how predictable is it, okay? We would use the median as a prediction, and the IQR tells us how confident we can be in that prediction. Now, if your data is symmetric, then standard deviation let me back up. If your data is symmetric, you're not going to use the median for your measure of central tendency. You're going to use the mean. And the value that tells how accurate or how confident you can be in using the mean to predict the outcome of future data is called standard deviation. Okay, and standard deviation is something that your calculator does for you. Okay, so right here in your one variable stats screen, these are the two values that go together, mean, the average, and the standard deviation. All right, it's kind of that like little circle with a tail. That's a Greek letter. I want to say it's a lowercase sigma, but don't quote me on that. Okay, so here we have in our textbook 3 students who and their scores for the spelling bee, and their teacher is trying to decide which student they think that they should put in and represent the school in the next round, okay, or something like that. If you find the directions, just have you find the means and the medians. So these are down here at the bottom, means and medians, and you'll notice they're all pretty much the same. So it'd be hard whether you're to choose based on just mean or median. Okay, so we're going to go and calculate something called standard deviation, and again, this would be just putting your data into your L1 and pulling that off your one variable stat screen. Okay, so that's what we did separately. We just did each one separately, and we found 3 separate standard deviations. So here's what the standard deviation tells us. It tells us that Taimar, his standard deviation is 32.23. It's the highest value. And it means that his data is the most spread apart. He's the most unpredictable. He had, overall, that's not a huge surprise. I mean, we look at his data, he had the lowest low score and the highest high score. So he's all over the place. All right, so he's not real predictable as far as how he's going to perform. Whereas Aaliyah and Jack, their standard deviations are a little bit closer together. Okay, Aaliyah's standard deviation being the lowest means that most of her data, you know, compared to Jack, more of her data is closer to the mean. More of her data is closer to the mean, so her performance is a little bit more predictable, a little bit more consistent. But a lot of you in class said, well, that's not the only thing I would base my decision on. You know, I mean, Jack has a higher lowest score. His lowest score is, let me roll this back up, 33 compared to her lowest, which is 20, and that's a 13-point difference. And his highest score, it's lower than hers, but it's only 3 points lower. And he's higher, you know, so hard to decide, okay. But a lot of you were torn. Now, their standard deviations are pretty close. I mean, Taimar is definitely out. So it would be a close call, but Aaliyah definitely has the lower standard deviation. Okay? Here's a picture of the box and whisker plots of their data. I'll make that a little bit bigger. And again, what I wanted you guys to get out of this graphic is that the data is symmetric. When data is symmetric, that's when you're going to use your mean. That's when you're going to use standard deviation. And we can see that, building on even what we talked about yesterday, Aaliyah's box, her middle 50% of data is very narrow compared to Jack or Tamar. So that tells us that her scores are more consistent and a little more predictable. Okay? And Jack's box is actually kind of big compared to Aaliyah's. So his data is just not quite as predictable as hers. Okay? I do want to make it clear on the homework that the directions say to calculate the standard deviation without the use of a calculator. We are not doing standard deviation by hand. You will do this entire assignment on your calculator. We are not doing the average by hand. We are not doing standard deviation by hand. You will just type all of your data into the calculator and pull the information off of your calculator. We're not doing standard deviation by hand. Also, just remember that pulling data off a dot plot, my data would be 0, 2, 5, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 12. You pull a data point for every x. Okay? So I want to make sure we all understand we are not doing any of this work by hand. We're doing everything on your graphing calculator. Okay? Thanks. See you next time.